Hi, everyone. Good day, good evening, wherever time zone you are in. I am Alexandria, and this is my co founder, Jasleen. Today, we are talking about how to do human centered layoffs and learning lessons from all the companies that unfortunately had to do layoffs over the years. I'm super excited for Jasleen to share all of her expertise with us today. As you know, my name is Alexandria. I am the co founder of The Disruptors and executive leadership coach. I'm a professional pivoter who started out adulting as a counselor, moved into tech leadership, and am now on a mission to help disrupt the systemic inequities so that we can create a future of work that is sustainable for everyone. Jasleen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm Jasleen. I am a career coach for women in tech and other male-dominated spaces, and I spent almost a decade of my career in human resource management. And so layoffs is a topic that I'm really passionate about especially because what we've been seeing lately in terms of layoffs and how they've been handled in the news cycle. We've been hearing a lot about what not to do and how it can negatively impact folks. And I think it is something, especially in an industry as volatile as tech, something we really need to have a conversation about all the different ways that you can do layoffs, how to be strategic about it, but most importantly, how to also be human centered.
Mhm.
Because, we've said this so many times at the disruptors, when it comes to DEI work, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and being human centered, that's not something that is in competition with the business results. It's something
Mhm.
that enhances them. And if you can really understand your talent and nurture your talent and create an environment where they can thrive, that's just good for everyone.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. And we would love to know where you are joining us from and if you've had experience either having to lay people off or you yourself got laid off and what impact that had on you. So go ahead and put that in the comments. We can see them. And we look forward to hearing from you all. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to ask them as well. So, Jasleen, why do you think this topic is so important? You touched on that a little bit, but like at the core, like what is the why of creating a human-centered process for layoffs?
Well, one is like we have tons of data. We have years of research around layoffs and how they actually impact the business results. And we know that they aren't good for business. And so talking about layoffs, talking about the impact, and really highlighting that this should be a last resort will help businesses also think about how to proactively manage this issue, how to think about their talent pipeline, not just in the near term, but from a long-term perspective, from a strategic perspective, the skills you need from the future, all of those we need to think from this mindset. And it needs to be like we see a lot of fear-based decisions in
Mhm.
leadership, and we want to move toward value-based decisions,
Mm.
profit-based decisions, people-based decisions. And so, I mean, I feel like it should be a given that we don't want to operate from a place of fear. But when you have pressure from whether it's your parent company, whether it's your investors, stakeholders that are, giving you feedback about what they want to see in terms of numbers, layoffs can often come from that place of fear instead of thinking about it in a different way and managing it in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, and just, like, I mean, it's just, nobody likes to be treated as if they're a number.
Mhm.
And so often people wanna do it quick and dirty because they think, "Oh, that's gonna be like pulling the Band-Aid off, and then I can say, 'Oh, I'm so sorry,' and move on."
Mhm.
But but there's more to it than that, and I think if we do this right, we can learn through it and learn really about how to manage talent in the most effective and strategic way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that comes to mind that I want to dig into first, right? Like we're going to talk about how to create human-centered layoff processes and how to approach it, but talking first about it being the last resort. So what are some things that people could consider prior to that? Because I think that often the knee jerk is like, oh, we are losing revenue or we're losing clients. We got to lay people off to save money, right? And it's a money saving tactic. But
Mhm.
what else could be an option that people aren't thinking about?
Yeah, so I think when you look at, okay, we're trying to save money, we're trying to really prove that, we are operating lean. And so, I mean, sometimes layoffs are inevitable, but there are other options to think about, how we do a hiring freeze. I know a lot of businesses have been doing that. Um, I'm not a huge fan of just hiring freeze across the board either, because then you create an issue. You see with a lot of the layoffs that happened in the 80s, where people laid people off and did a hiring freeze both at the same time. Later on down the line, you have a gap in terms of leadership, because when people come into that seniority, there's a gap in talent.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see people retiring and you see people who are too junior, but you have this moment where you're lacking leadership. So depending on how large your organization is and how important it is to have that holistic mindset on leadership, I'm not always a fan of hiring freezes.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other ways to cut costs. There are other ways to, and I think most businesses probably do that. They probably look at, okay, what are all the different things we could do? I mean, one is the executives can take a pay cut. We, we see a lot of executives are still making a lot of money, but their employees, there's a huge gap there
Mm-hmm.
where potentially that could account for the cost savings from a layoff. But I think it's just really just exploring all the options and making sure you do your due diligence before you jump to that.
Yeah, I think the thinking about cost cutting measures, right? And I think most companies do, right? They're constantly looking for ways to save money. But the example you just gave of executives taking a pay cut or even offering, like having kind of like a town hall situation and saying, like, here's the position that we're in, and here is what our burn
Mhm.
rate looks like or our shortfall looks like. Here's the options we thought of. What do you think our options are? And really making it a collaborative effort, I think, is important, but potentially doing pay cuts for everybody or pausing 401k matches if that's an option. Like there's a lot of different interesting things that you can do to save that money and even like to put a pause or to give some more runway that isn't just getting rid of talent because like you leave holes and you leave all kinds of problems that it's a ripple effect throughout the
Yeah.
company.
And I would be cautious about involving your employees in that decision making process, because one, you first need to be accountable as a leader for what you did to contribute to that situation and what you need to do to get out of it.
Mhm,
So I think for sure involving all the leaders and having them kind of think strategically first. When we engage employees on it, we need to be really careful about how long we're drawing out the whole
sure.
process and how much we're putting the accountability on them to save their own jobs.
Mhm,
So as long as we're not doing that and we're bringing people in on a need to know basis and making sure the leaders are still remaining accountable for the results,
mhm,
then I'm okay with that, because I love collaboration. I think we just need to balance that with looking at it from a change management point of view and the stress and the uncertainty that puts on all of your workforce and the impact it has on morale. So
mhm,
I do like the idea of doing it quickly, um, but taking enough time that it's done right.
mhm.
So kind of finding that balance, because you don't want to do it quickly and just say, okay, we're going to lay all these people off and that's it. But finding enough time to do it in a way that's strategic
Mhm, and thoughtful, right?
and
Making the
thoughtful.
decision, like, really thinking about it, like you said, not acting out of fear and just responding, but really
Yeah.
thinking and processing and choosing the
Yeah,
path.
because when I say strategic, like, I think a lot of people when they think that, they just think about the business and the finances and being strategic about that, but we need to start being strategic about how we manage our talent, because your business doesn't exist without talent, and so it's all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about what we see as what not to do. So what are some big, like, absolutely nots
Well, I
to
mean,
be
the
aware of?
first is, like, the bare minimum is you're following the law. Like you're making sure that you're, looking up all the laws in your jurisdiction, because each state, each country, province
Mhm.
has their own laws. And so you're consulting with legal. So that would be the not to do, is just going at it without, that's the bare minimum. I think most people do that anyways.
I would hope
Um,
so.
yeah, I hope so. The other one is just being reactive. So not planning at all, again, coming from that fear-based mindset,
Mhm.
and just, we got to get this over with. We got to get, we got to get our numbers right, and we're just treating people like numbers. That's a definite not to do.
Mhm.
Um Making, like, having a scapegoat, of so I feel like sometimes people use layoff time to get rid of poor performers.
Oh, sure.
So I think it's really important to, like, to recognize the difference between, you know firing someone and
Mhm.
laying someone off. Laying
Mhm.
someone off means, okay, this business unit is now redundant, or this job is now redundant. It has nothing to do with the person who's
Mhm.
in the job. And so often what will happen is people will say, okay, I'm going to use this as an excuse to get rid of my poor performers, without actually communicating that, or without taking the accountability that you didn't have those conversations with people beforehand. And there are other ways to think about it, to think about layoffs. I'll get to that later, from a performance perspective, but in a way that is actually fair
Mhm.
and makes sense. So that'd be another one. Just lack of communication, poor communication. Like, we've heard a lot of people just, you get an email and then done, like, no closure. Um, not people not understanding, like, why it's happening, and no accountability from the business. So really just poorly communicated across the board. And the other one is when there's really no support, there's no outplacement services, no severance pay that is competitive, because, we said at a minimum, you want to do what's legal. So you're also
Mhm.
looking up what are those severance terms.
Mhm.
But often those severance is not very much in a lot of places. And so if you're only getting a week's pay for every year of service, that's, in this market today, realistically, that's not enough to carry you forward until you find a new job.
Mhm.
Because I this stat comes out of the US. um it used to take, I think, approximately 3 months to get a job. Right now it's taking most people 6 months and above to
Mhm.
get a job. And so that's just the nature of the market now. So we need to consider that and factor that into severance pay. So always be competitive when it comes to severance. I think that's just good for your brand as a business, and it's
Mhm.
just what's right.
Absolutely. Dr. Carrie Ann put a comment in. I'm glad you mentioned the accountability of leaders because what is sometimes not addressed is the behind the scenes mismanagement of funds or even the misaligned engagements for a quick dollar versus a sustainable dollar.
Yeah, because sometimes your employees are paying the price for your mistake.
Hmm.
And we see this time and time again, where the leader is, and I'm going to get to this when we talk about the right way to do this, but they center themselves
Hmm.
in the layoff conversation. Like, today was the hardest day for me of my life, and it was so, like, it's not something I want to do. And yeah, okay, of course you're going to get emotional about it, but you have to recognize that they're the ones more impacted. You're still there.
Right.
You still have your bonus, you still have your executive paycheck, and you're the one who got the business to that point. And so taking accountability for, because I think especially in tech, we're seeing this, like, it's just normal. It's the volatility,
Hmm.
it's the fact that we're building up and trying to grow at a rapid pace. And sometimes that's for the optics. And so you got
Hmm.
to own that. If you're doing that, if you're creating verticals just for the sake of looking innovative versus actually being innovative,
Hmm.
then you need to own that and
Yeah.
say, we took a lot of risks, we took a lot of chances, And, part of that was inherent to my decision as a leader.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, owning that, showing up in support for the people, right? Both the people that you're laying off, but also the people who remain, because this is also going to affect them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's going to impact morale. And we see that in the data as well. Productivity goes down 20% for almost 3 years.
Mhm.
And so, morale, engagement, productivity, those are all inherently linked. And so you need to think about how the decisions you're making about the people who are leaving are directly impacting your current workforce, your remaining workforce, and your business.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about every decision is a pebble in the water with ripple effects. And you can't avoid that. There will
Mhm.
be ripple effects, and thinking as much as possible, because we can't know what we don't know, right? We can't see around every corner,
Mhm.
but there's some clear data that we can rely on, right? Past predictors is the way we can
Yeah.
create strategy and move forward and make informed data-driven decisions, right? Tech is all about data. So use the data to make those decisions. So let's
Yeah.
talk about process and like deciding all the pieces of how you decide to do it, why you decide to do it. Like, what does the process
Yeah.
option look like?
So this is the hardest part, and I think you need to make sure that you have good HR professionals working for you. And a lot of organizations, they're like, yeah, we have HR, but they treat HR as administration.
Mm,
And so if you need to have an HR person, or even if they're not an HR person, you need to have somebody who's really got the eyes on the people
mhm,
on your leadership team, always thinking about the people, and they need to be involved in this. You want to have a communications expert involved in this. If you're a really small business and you don't have access to those resources, there are places where you can come and ask these questions of, okay, you can ask us, like, how do I do this in the right way? How do I do
mhm,
this in a people-centered way? There are a lot of ways of doing it. There is some people kind of just want to simplify and say, okay, last in, first out,
mhm,
first in, first out, eliminate this entire business unit. Um, you could retrain and redeploy people. That's another option. You really need to think about all of the options and what is the best approach.
mhm,
And the way that I would go about this is thinking about first, why are we doing layoffs to begin with? So going back to that accountability, what did we do wrong to get us here?
mhm,
What's happening in the market? Where do we need to go in the future to
mhm,
compete?
mhm,
If our business is going to stay competitive, what are the skills that we need for the future? Because if you just do last in, first out, you may be eliminating a lot of those new skills that are critical for your business.
mhm,
If you do first in, first out, you may be eliminating some of that wisdom and leadership.
mhm,
So you need to be thinking about not just like having a cookie cutter approach necessarily, but what is right for the business? What is going to set the business up for success?
mhm,
Not just from a skill point of view, but from an organizational design point of view.
mhm,
And so sometimes it is necessary to say, okay, this line of business is done. That's okay to get rid of a whole vertical. But the way that I've seen it managed in the past really well is I'm a proponent that gives employees the most information and most choice in the
mhm.
matter. Because when you do it this way, you often see people who self-select out,
Yeah.
because you may have people who were close to retirement that you didn't realize. You may have had people who were thinking about a career change anyways. And you can say, who wants to volunteer to get this severance? Because
Mhm,
and so those are conversations that leaders can have and then report that back up to whoever's managing this layoff situation.
mhm,
And then also, like, then set up the business without thinking about the people at all. Set up the org design in terms of, okay, how are we redesigning roles and responsibilities and different parts of the organization that is going to create the change we need to see to get us to where we need to go.
mhm,
And again, bringing in an expert who understands organizational design will help you with this. And then okay, these are the skills I need. These are the people, the types of roles I need. And then you can repost all of those jobs and allow people to apply for them.
Mhm.
Because often that means a shifting of roles, a shifting of responsibilities. And so you look at, okay, what are the roles that aren't impacted? What are the roles? And often I've seen even the roles that aren't impacted, everything gets posted. Everyone gets an opportunity to either apply for their own role or say, yes, I do want to stay in the role that I'm in,
Mhm.
or apply for a new role, which can often lead to greater job satisfaction because maybe, if you look at that's another piece of data that you can
Mhm.
bring into this is look at your employee surveys. Like
Mhm.
where are people unhappy and why are they unhappy? And how could this actually lead to a positive change for some folks
Mhm.
so that the people who remain are happier and using their skills in the best way?
Yeah. Like you said, the hit on productivity and engagement is going to happen because of layoffs, but if you can restructure your organization in which you put people in a position where they're more likely to thrive or be
Mm,
happier, then that's a way that you can manage that gap of drop in productivity and like the morale stuff because now they've been reinvigorated. And so, like, yeah, it's stressful and it's hard still, but being able to take a moment to empower and encourage somebody is huge and could have
mhm.
long lasting effects on the business as a whole and it be better in the end.
Yeah. It's not just a cost cutting exercise.
Mhm.
Have to look at it as this is something huge that is happening that's impacting a lot of people and it's because the business was in trouble.
Mhm.
And so how are we actually doing it in a way that isn't going to repeat what we've seen in the past, which is lower productivity, lower profit?
Mhm.
How can we do it in a way that minimizes the impact on the business, minimizes the disruption on the business, and also does it in a way where employees will thrive even more and the business will thrive even more? And
Mhm.
so look at your data that you already have of why things weren't going great
Mhm.
and set yourself up for success in the future.
Yeah. I also want to highlight the piece of the last in first out, especially in the wake of everything that changed in 2020 and the focus on diversity, equity and inclusion. The likelihood that you are disproportionately going to affect people from historically marginalized communities is
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah.
And being very aware of what impacts that has on your business, on
Yes.
those communities, but to all of the different initiatives that you have engaged in to try and make those changes within your company, trying to get more diversity in, trying to move forward and innovate and create more inclusion and opportunity. Like, what impact are your choices going to have on that as well? Because
Yeah.
that should be woven into your business strategy and everything that you're doing.
Exactly. You have to go back to that accountability piece. You're not just accountable for the financial results, you're accountable for every public commitment you made. So if in 2020 you made a public commitment and you allocated resources to diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's the first to go, you were never really committed to begin with.
Mhm.
And then if you're laying people off without that equity lens, it
Mhm.
was all we know that it was all just lip service at this point, and you didn't really care about it. And so, and again, it goes back to, what we're always saying, it's not in competition with the business.
Right.
This is the future of work. This is the future of business. You need to be accountable. You
Mhm.
need to own your commitments to the people, not just your customers, your employees, everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, that personal responsibility, like as the leader, when you took that position, you took personal responsibility for the company and for all the people who work with you
Mhm.
and all your customers, like you just said, like you have to follow through.
And it can be hard if investors and other stakeholders are just saying, no, we need you to fix the numbers and we need you to do it yesterday. And there's all this pressure on you.
Mhm.
But part of your job as a leader is to have a backbone and to stand up for what is right and to show people through the numbers as well that it is going to be good for business.
Mhm.
Because you're now just believing this fear that this is the only way to survive. This is the only way for the business to be there tomorrow. And
Mhm.
it's not true in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And so, I was part of an organization where we did learn from, a lot of the layoffs in the 80s. And so we said, okay, this time we are going to change how we do them. We are going to still be recruiting new grads. We're still focused on diversity. We're still going to do all those things we committed to doing, and we're going to have to look at ways to reorganize and get out of this mess that we're in. And
Mhm.
a lot of that wasn't your fault, because if it's the economy,
Sure.
like I don't want to put all the accountability on the business, but it's easy to say, okay, it's a recession, and this is inevitable. um but I would invite you to really just question whether you're jumping onto this layoff bandwagon because everybody else is doing it.
Mhm.
Think that's the only way.
Yeah, especially in an innovation industry like tech, right? And there's a lot of speculation. There is easy fear, and there's been a lot of fear permeating through society for years now, right? Like that hasn't really
Mhm,
gone away. Like COVID was the switch flip, like, and everything changed. And
mhm,
so making sure that, again, not reacting to fear, but really sitting down and saying, okay, what's true here?
mhm.
Are we doing this because we see everybody else doing it and we're like, "Oh, well, I guess we should do it too?" Or do you actually need to do it for your business? Again, what other options could there be? Like, what does sustainability look like versus the quick quarter over quarter profit?
Yeah. Yeah, and learn from the mistakes of the past. Like, we know we can do better.
Mhm.
I think I mean, I don't wanna label anyone as lazy, but, like, I get it. It is a lot of work to do it right,
Yeah.
but it is a lot of work to make sure your business is competitive,
Mhm.
and this is very much in alignment with that. It's not in
Absolutely.
competition. So it's, again, back to that, be accountable, use the data you have, and do what's right. And so, in choosing that, the other thing you want to make sure is that whatever process you choose,
Mhm.
you look at it from an equity lens. You look at it in terms of how every underrepresented group is impacted.
Mhm.
Because if you before you go ahead and execute, you need to say, okay, if we do it this way, how are our Black, Indigenous, and other people of color impacted? How are women being impacted if we do it this way? How might that look different? How are people with disabilities being impacted? You need to look at it from all of those lenses,
Mhm.
because you're not automatically thinking about that. And
Mhm.
so without having to do all the bias work all at once, just look at it from that lens and make sure whatever process you then choose is centered around the business and the people, right? Not just
Mhm.
from fear. It's value based, it's data driven, and it's very transparent. Everyone is clear on how it is playing out and in what timeline,
Mhm.
because people need to plan for their lives. Like, I've heard people say, I know I'm getting laid off and people don't want us talking about it. Like, can I put on LinkedIn that I'm looking for work? Like, this is so weird. Like,
Mhm.
dragging on this process and telling people they're impacted. And especially when we talk about the time that we're in post COVID,
Mhm.
we've been, as a collective, as a society, we've been in this state of uncertainty,
Mhm.
and to put people through that uncertainty again and for longer than they need to be, especially if it's not their first layoff, because I've had clients who are going through their second, even third layoff.
Mhm. Mhm.
Talented, amazing people who just happen to not be in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
And that really takes a toll. And then it's less about, um, for them finding a job. It's more like a mental health kind of, they need to prioritize that, because we're not conducive to that. And again, the people who are left in your business
Mhm.
are not going to be performing as well, because they may be thinking, am I next?
Mhm.
Like, what is the point of even committing to this business if they don't care about people?
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
These are real valid feelings. And I think a lot often, you hear leaders say things like, well, they should just be grateful that they weren't impacted. They should be, and I even see people on LinkedIn, posting, "Oh, there were layoffs at my company again. I'm so grateful that I wasn't impacted." Like, no, like, let's stop that.
Yeah,
Like,
that toxic positivity.
yeah, like, I mean, not all positivity is toxic, but
No, but it
sometimes it is. It's
yeah.
borderline toxic positivity, right? Because we're just normalizing this. And it's just
Mhm.
like, and then you're like, oh, I have great friends that I want to see move on or whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, yes, help your friends. We
Yeah,
got to get people redeployed and working as soon as possible. But you don't need to just be grateful. You don't need to just be grateful for being safe. We need to keep leaders accountable for this so we don't keep repeating the same mistakes.
absolutely. Well, Dr. Carrie Ann is sharing an antidote. Experiencing my first layoff, and the founder that laid me off was offended when I put up my open for work on LinkedIn. I was quite amused because she was not about to seriously render help, especially after her disrespectful discussion around layoff. It's
Yeah,
wild.
it's
Yeah.
wild. It is wild. Like, you can't expect people, individuals who have families to take care of, to be more loyal to a company that is laying them off
Yep.
than to their families and to themselves, because you need to
Mhm.
take care of yourself. And
Well,
if
and
a
again,
business
that's
is not
centering
loyal,
self, right?
no,
Not
just
not
common
centering
sense.
the people in front of you.
I mean, that's just common sense. And like I've said that to people. Apparently, by the way, for the job seekers out there who are listening to this, there is a way to say you're open to work with not the public seeing it and just recruiters seeing it.
Mm,
I
yeah.
didn't realize that. And so that was something I learned recently. I thought I'd share. But yeah, it needs to be a fair, transparent process that gives employees the most choice.
Mhm.
The most choice possible. Whenever you can give them choice, in terms of what happens to them, maybe not choice in terms of like how the layoffs are going to go,
Sure.
but choice in terms of like what they want and
Mhm.
and where their ambitions are and where they see themselves. And
Mhm.
so giving them a chance to stay with the business. And this is another way, like when I talked about performance management, this is not to replace performance management.
Right.
However, it is a way to manage performance, because you'll see, like, when you do post all these roles and people are applying,
Mhm.
that's a more fair way for poor performers to be. And I don't even like that label. I hate that label. I'm going to take that back. But it's a way for people who aren't thriving in that environment
Yeah.
to then realize this is not the place for me.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
being really open about those conversations, and even, like, sometimes people don't even pause long enough to think about, "Am I thriving in this position? Am I happy here?" They so often we're just doing the thing that we're supposed to be doing, and this was the trajectory that we got set on, so we're doing it without even, like, looking up and being like, "Oh, wait a minute, like, do I want this?" And so
Yeah.
being able to have that conversation of, "Do you want this?"
Yeah.
An opportunity to think. Some people haven't been given that before, and that
And
can be a
it
powerful
helps
movement
them
for
to
them.
prepare then for the job market, because now it forces those performance discussions
Mhm.
and how they're being perceived, and having that discussion of where they're going to thrive, that when they go through the process and say, okay, I guess there isn't any role for me here anymore,
Mhm.
then they can they've collected some data, so that they, when they are working without placement, when they are working with a career coach, or when they are going to interviews, now they understand what they need to thrive and what their strengths are,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
everyone has different strengths. And we need to have these conversations, because often, like, this is why I don't like the label poor performer. It's not that they're a poor performer. It's you as a leader have now found the ways to motivate, coach, develop them, or help them understand their strengths.
Mhm.
Like, not all of that sits on the shoulders of a leader, but if a leader isn't happy, they need to be expressing that that's an issue.
Yeah, which should have been happening the whole time, right? I think the same thing with somebody being fired and somebody being laid off, like, neither should be surprise.
Mm-mm.
Like, you shouldn't be in the moment where people are like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
It should be the
And we could have
is
a
that
whole,
okay.
we could have a whole 'nother episode on, on performance improvement plans and how people do those wrong. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, I've seen some really bad ones.
Yes.
But yeah, the sticking to the topic of layoffs,
Yes.
layoffs are not about performance.
Right.
They could be a way for you to manage the performance of the business as a whole, but they're
Right.
not a performance management exercise.
Yes. So
Yeah.
let's talk about you said early on the equity lens. What does that mean and what does that look like? How do you go through this process and create the process for your company through an equity lens?
Yeah. So first you should be collecting data on what are those underrepresented groups? What are the ones that we're really focused on? Because as a business, you might be focused more on on specific underrepresented groups than others, and that's okay. Like,
Mhm.
for example, if you're like, I come from the oil and gas industry, and if you're operating in communities that impact indigenous people,
Mhm.
that could be one that you're like, we really need to get this right. We
Mhm.
really need to understand how we're impacting here.
Mhm.
Because that has an impact on that community as a whole as well. If you're laying people off now from that community,
Right.
you need to look at it. So the data, who are the underrepresented groups? Where are they? How do we know how many are going to be impacted? And because already you're underrepresented with underrepresented groups, and then they're disproportionately impacted through the layoffs.
Mhm.
Like, that to me is a symptom of a bigger problem, if that's what's happening.
Mhm.
So you need to make sure, are we looking at this from that lens and retaining our diverse talent that we work so hard to recruit, and make
Mhm.
sure that this was a safe place for them to work, and maybe it isn't. And so again, you got to look at it through that process and say, okay, what else are we learning here? What am I still answering the question?
Yeah, like, how do you do it with it the equity lens? How do you
The equity lens, yes.
put up the equity lens and look at the process and the decisions that you're making? So,
Yes.
what communities are you impacting? How else does that show up?
So yeah, so what communities are you impacting? Is everyone getting a fair chance at being able to stay? Like, whatever process you choose, again, does everyone have a fair chance at staying? Are we accounting for the bias in the decisions that are being made? And so
Mhm.
if you do end up going with reposting jobs, retraining, redeploying, again, how might certain opportunities be more accessible to the dominant group versus the underrepresented groups,
Mhm.
and why, and how are you mitigating the impact of that? How are you managing the impact of that?
Mhm.
So looking at it from that lens, looking at it from a diversity of skill lens, even, because it's not just about the underrepresented groups. That's very important, but you also want to make sure you have the right skills. So what is that diverse set of skills look like?
Mhm.
What are and this one is, I want to be cautious on, because you also want to make sure you've got a really strong leadership pipeline.
Mhm.
And so if you're looking at it from, okay, these are the skills we need, this is how many potential leaders we need, or future leaders, because you're really looking at it as a pipeline. How
Mhm.
are you assessing the leadership behaviors? Are you doing that from a patriarchal lens,
Mhm.
from a stereotypical white supremacy patriarchal lens, or are you actually broadening the definition of what those behaviors could look like,
Mhm.
and who in the organization could be those leaders?
Mhm.
So looking at it from all levels, all skill sets, all different underrepresented groups, accessibility, look at it from that perspective. So again, with folks who, not just accessibility in terms of what groups have access to the opportunities, but also accessibility in terms of, how are people with disabilities being impacted? Because you got
Mhm.
to recognize too, a lot of people, you might not have that data.
Mhm.
And so how are we making sure that leaders are educated enough to flag those kind of concerns, and to
Mhm.
have the conversations in an inclusive way? And that's the other way, how are we communicating it? Are we
Mhm.
communicating it in an inclusive way?
So let's talk about that. What would that look like? How would a company know what that conversation could and should look like?
And so, yeah, this again, you got to find the balance because you don't want to give too much information and overwhelm people.
Mhm,
And you don't want to give too little information and leave things up for assumptions or not feeling like you are really sure about how that process is going to play out and how you are impacted. And
mhm,
it's about the content of the communication, it's about the frequency of the communication, it's about the inclusive language and the clear accountability in that.
mhm,
And what does this mean? Where are we going in the future? You need to be doing that kind of storytelling approach of this is what has happened. We
mhm,
are being accountable for that. This is how we're going to manage it. This is how you're impacted
mhm,
very clearly. And this is what we're promising to do differently in the future. This is why we're doing it this way. And this is how we're setting ourselves up for the future. Because typically it's okay, we're doing layoffs, done. We're really sorry. I feel really bad.
right.
No, accountability, like really be clear on what is happening and then what does this mean for the future and how are we ensuring that because of this we're set up for success, not for another let's have another repeat cycle of this
Mhm.
and be in the exact same place, a year later, 2 years later down the road.
Right. Yeah. I think that piece right there, because that something that's coming to mind is like tech companies, I've seen them do it before, hearing about active companies do it, multiple rounds of layoffs. So some of the reorg that you're talking about, like how would that be managed if you end up having to do multiple rounds of layoffs
Yeah.
within a relatively short amount of time?
I think it's okay to do multiple rounds because to me it's first of all, why are we doing multiple rounds? Are we doing multiple rounds because we're just trying to make the numbers match up and just we're just doing it for the sake of doing it? Then no. But if you're doing multiple rounds, sometimes to me that's a signal that we're really trying to manage it properly. And so we're going to first figure out this line of business and how we're going to have to go through because now we're redeploying maybe HR resources to go to this line of business to make sure, okay, this is all set up properly. This is how the org design is going to look like and the roles and responsibilities, posting all the jobs. And so you learn from each round as well of how to do it well. So
Mhm,
I'm kind of okay with doing multiple rounds, which again, it's the communication to the people who are watching that first round of,
mhm,
is this going to impact me too? Like they're going to be rumblings. And so the more you can kind of communicate like a broader timeline of saying, yes, we are doing multiple rounds. This is the line of business where we're starting. And here's the timeline for the rest of the businesses. And again, that gives people time to plan ahead to say, okay, I know we're going and like, don't even call it layoffs, call it a reorg, right? And
mhm,
say, okay, we're planning for this reorg and we know that we have whatever is the timeline. I don't need to worry about it now. And I'm having those conversations with my leader to understand what that role could look like for me. And the
mhm.
leaders are having the conversations with their HR folks to kind of get prepared for that as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming up in that makes sense, right? If you're doing the reorg type structure, but if there is an element in which you start bleeding money, right? You have clients leaving, like there is an element of trying to play catch up with the numbers and you have certain milestones like if we can retain X amount or bring in X amount, we don't have to do another round of layoffs.
Mhm.
How do you communicate that effectively?
Yeah, so that is a tricky one because again, I don't like the fact that we're putting pressure again on the employees and the leadership is not taking full accountability for how we got here. But if it is something that, you've decided to do it that way, I don't think it would be my favorite approach. It's not the most proactive approach again.
Mhm.
Um, but if you are going to do it that way, then again, it comes to the clear communication. I don't love this option. I guess
Mhm.
it's where I don't love this option because again, it's like, okay, we're now we're just playing games with our employees to say, you got to make this much money or you're maybe at risk.
And yeah, I know we don't like that option, right? And unfortunately, depending on where in the stream companies are in the tech stream,
Hmm.
their revenue and bottom line could be significantly affected by layoffs in other companies and cutbacks and cost savings in other companies, and it be an unfolding situation. It's
Yeah.
rapidly changing.
Yeah, someone who's in that scenario, like I kind of want to sit down and ask them some questions to say, okay, why are we doing it this way? Why are we putting pressure now on employees to make the numbers add up versus looking at doing a root cause analysis of what is the issue? Because if we're just like, okay, we're going to put pressure and we're again coming from that patriarchal mindset, that command and control mindset.
Mhm,
And so if we're really thinking about it proactively and saying, okay, why aren't we making money here? Is it
mhm,
a branding issue? Is it are we not generating enough leads? Are we not have we got the right market? Do we need to explore new markets? The leader should already know what needs to happen, right? Instead of saying, okay, employees now go make money, right? Because if you're in this, like, so yes, maybe the economy has a little bit to do with it, right? But guaranteed there were issues in the organization before the recession. So what were those issues that weren't allowing the organization to adapt to a recession? What was the planning that needed to happen before we got here, and start to implement that. And you should know that when you implement that, you should have a good predictor of the market and what is possible. And again, you don't know the outcome exactly,
mhm.
but if you can plan it as well as you can and say it in that way, this is what we're testing and this is what our goals are. But I don't like this is what our goals are. And if we don't meet it, layoffs.
Sure.
I like to just say, okay, here are what our goals are. This is where we're at. Our business is not competitive because of X, Y, and Z. And this is what needs to change. And we believe if we change this, this is where we'll get to. And then if we don't, then you as a leadership team have that conversation of what's going to happen.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
and I
then
think all that
communicate
makes
it.
sense. So
Yeah.
one thing that comes up there too is if you are in a company who you could be affected
Mhm.
by continued recession happening, right? Taking this moment and opportunity to look at the business and are we recession proof? What are our options if we get affected? How much can we manage or hold moving forward in this before we have to make those kinds of decisions? Doing that evaluation now is important to that pre-planning piece.
Absolutely. Like you can do this now. You can look at, if we what is that threshold or
Mhm,
what would be the trigger for layoffs,
mhm,
right? What is going to get you to that place?
mhm,
And now how do we prevent that, working backwards from that and preventing that from happening?
mhm,
How are we planning it? Dr. Carrie Ann made a note here: agile leadership, coaching, and critical thinking in design for sustainability are limited in so many ways, in so many orgs.
mhm,
Sadness. This is so true. We hear so many people talking about agile leadership,
mhm.
but layoffs are a symptom that we, and I'm not saying, like, obviously you're going to have attrition and you need
Sure.
attrition. That's just kind of the natural way organizations work, and people move on. But the sheer amount of it is proving that we didn't have agility to move into a recession. And
Mhm,
so again, it's going back to the drawing board and reimagining it, and being more proactive.
mhm,
And so this could really you could look at your leadership behaviors. What are the behaviors? Are we always firefighting? Are we
mhm,
always chasing that next shiny, innovative, sexy thing?
mhm,
Or are we actually proactively managing and nurturing what's going well
mhm.
so that, we have the agility to take risks in these different arms?
Right.
And so what does that look like? How are we bringing in the right coaches and the right agile coaches and the right, org design people to really look at that in terms of, to Dr. Carrie Ann's point, in terms of sustainability?
Mhm. Well, and I think Really checking your definition and attachment to some of those words, right? Like wanting to be lean in business, wanting to be agile in business, because we see people using those terms and then the way it is in practice, it doesn't mean what they think it means, right? Like
Yeah.
there is a difference between lean and emaciated. And often companies making cuts and deciding to be lean, but not looking at the overall impact and how they're stretching
Yeah.
everybody who remained. And so, did you increase somebody's responsibilities and hold and tasks
Yeah.
without increasing their pay or without adjusting expectations? Are you just piling on more for who's left? Because that's not agile or lean. Like,
No.
that's emergency and survival. And sure, for a moment, but that's
Yeah.
not sustainable.
No, that's a great point. Like, I love how you said that. Like, are you lean or are you emaciated? Because if you're leaving your organization emaciated and also morale has gone down
Mhm.
and there's the capacity is there.
Right.
You're now impacting your capacity, which is like critical to business success.
Mhm.
And if you've got people who are burnt out,
Mhm.
demoralized, disengaged, and not productive,
Mhm.
you were better off before the layoffs,
Yeah.
like, financially even. I mean,
Mhm.
the numbers show that, like, we're not making up this data, you can look it up. The numbers show that organizations that go through layoffs, they all see a dip in profits, and it takes a while to recover,
Mhm.
and
Well, and I
so
think the other piece that is there too is the psychological safety. Was that there before? Is that there after? How are you fixing that rupture, right? Because there has been a rupture in trust if you had to
Mhm,
go through with layoffs. The rumor mill
mhm,
was started, like there is all kinds of ruptures that occurred. And if you don't resolve those ruptures and
yeah,
fix and repair, then the
yeah.
fallout is going to continue.
And that's so important when it comes back to accountability again, because when we talk about trust, like when I think of the trust equation, I don't know if you heard of the trust equation, but the elements of that are credibility, reliability. Credibility is, do I trust what this person says they are? Reliability is, can I predict that they're going to do what they're going to do? And okay, my organization has always done things fairly, so they'll do this fairly, which we've seen organizations go against that, so that
Mhm.
breaks trust. Am I creating that intimacy where where employees feel safe, that psychological safety to say how they're feeling through this process
Right.
in a way that they're not being shut down and told, you should just be grateful you're still here. And then at the denominator for that equation is self-orientation. And again, when you see a lot of these layoffs where the leader is centering their own feelings,
Mhm.
they're making it about them, right? And
Mhm.
so, again, you need to be talking about how that's impacting others and
Mhm.
how you led them there and be just honest and transparent.
Mhm.
Like,
Absolutely.
people are afraid of that because I think from a branding perspective, it's like, "Oh, we're admitting that we had bad leadership." Like, no, everyone knows that anyways. They appreciate the honesty and the transparency.
Yeah, that ownership and that vulnerability that it takes to say, "I made a mistake."
Mhm.
Like, that's
Yeah.
huge, and, like, you have to have that acknowledgement before any sort of healing can begin.
Yeah, and even if it is like, okay, the economy has impacted us in these unforeseeable ways, but even that, we know that the economy is going to go up and down. So how are we
Mhm.
preparing that agility, the sustainability? So I think no matter what, you own a part of it as a leader.
Mhm.
No matter what, you need to own, even if it's a small part, you have to find that part that you own.
Right.
I mean, we talk about this in the DEI space all the time as well, like when it comes to being an anti-racist or, an active ally to any underrepresented group, you're always having to look at it from the perspective of what is the work I still need to do, because as especially if you're in a dominant group, there will be parts of that marginalized identity that you will not relate to, you won't understand. And so you need to step into the space of how am I contributing to the problem?
Mhm.
And so this helps not just with DEI, but it helps with you as a business leader to really keep looking at it from the perspective, not to like feel guilty about it or to, beat yourself up about it. It's to learn and grow and be comfortable being vulnerable.
Mhm.
Anyone who goes into business as an entrepreneur or as a leader, like, you have to be vulnerable.
Yes.
You have to be. And so this is an exercise in vulnerability as well.
Absolutely. Like, that's one of the keys of being human-centered and realizing we are all humans, from the person who started the company
Mhm.
through everybody who works with the company. We don't stop being human because we clocked in. We are always
Exactly.
human.
Exactly. And if you're a human-centered business and you treat yourself like a human and everyone else around you, then you're also going to be more connected to your customers.
Mhm.
They're going to see that, like, these days, especially look at the data on Gen Z and how they're not loyal to brands the way people were in the past. And so the
Mhm.
future of businesses, if you want to thrive, you really need to be always walking that line of accountability.
Mhm.
You need to be
Absolutely.
walking that line, because if you're not, you're going to be, not to evoke the fear-based mindset, but like, but it is like you're going to be canceled. It's like cancel culture with Gen Z. And so even though I don't totally believe in cancel culture,
Sure.
it is a knee-jerk reaction to this resistance to change.
Well, there's trust, right? And we don't trust in brands anymore, and Gen Z doesn't trust in brands,
Mhm,
and there's no loyalty, and so if you show that they shouldn't be loyal to you, very quickly they won't be,
mhm.
and that just is, right? Like,
Yeah,
you have to have that trust there in order to cultivate a long-term relationship.
yeah. And when you're thinking about it, because like part of doing human-centered layoffs is looking at your pipeline
Mhm,
holistically as well, like long term. And so your pipeline also includes new grads and Gen Z who are watching what you're doing. They're
mhm.
paying attention. And
Always
that
watching.
information is out there forever when they do a Google search on your company. And so if you are a company who makes it into the news cycle, that's forever.
It's true.
People know what you've done.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that information. If anybody heard their company in this conversation, these conversations are occurring at your company, you have concerns about where diversity, equity, and inclusion and sustainability sits in your organization right now, please feel free to reach out to us. We are offering a free DEI evaluation call for anybody who signs up. You can head over to jobdisruptors.com and book a call with us. We'll do that evaluation. Join us next week for our event. We will be back at 11 a.m. next week as well with more juicy information for you. And this is also released as a podcast. Jasleen, do you want to tell them where they can find that?
Yeah, so please subscribe in all the places to the podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and Anchor. We will post the links here to the podcast so you can sign up. And if you get a chance, please rate us as well. That would be really appreciated. We really want to increase the visibility and get some momentum going around more and more leaders and even just employees and future leaders listening into how to do these things right, because these are the conversations that are happening behind closed doors. We want to bring them out into the light. We want to bring them into the forefront so that we're really changing and shaping the future of work. So please rate us, follow us, all the things.
Yes, all the things. I appreciate you, Jasleen, and we will see everybody next week.
See you next
Bye.
week.